What's upper Dub Nation? This is Rich with Let's Go Warriors, where we rediscover how to love our warriors all over again. And that's what we do here is we try and find ways for you to root for your team, Dub Nation. We're not here to throw anybody under the bus, and we're all about information instead of, entertainment. All right. So what we're going to do today is analyze our new 1A trade target. It's Jaren Jackson Jr., and I must credit Yossi Gozlan for the inspiration. Let me pull up Yossi's video with Sam Quinn of CBS Sports. All right, so here we have Yossi Gozlan's YouTube channel, Third Apron, and in the videos, you'll see that he just recently posted a Golden State Warriors analysis. And so I'm going to summarize all that for you and put a link in the description and hopefully on top of this video if I remember to do that. Now, I should preface this by saying that on our Let's Go Warriors YouTube channel, we did do a Naz Reid scenario, and that was basically brought up in a live stream with my co-host Dean Chambers when we did one of the NBA Finals or Valkyrie watch parties. And by the way, happy Game 7 Sunday. It's going to be a great day today, isn't it? We've also got the Valkyries after the NBA Finals game, really during overlapping. So we're going to cover both games, and I hope you'll join us later on our channel right here on our live stream watch party. So we've had Naz Reid as our 1A target. And obviously before that, we had Lauri Markkanen. And that dated back till last year, even. Obviously, the deal never happened, although the Warriors were rumored. And I got to credit my co-host, Dean Chambers, for kind of coming up with Lauri Markkanen as a target. And so we went to Naz Reid, and this was a scenario that required Naz to opt in on his $15 million salary. Now, if I switch back to the other screen, you'll see here that this is an article that talks about not just Naz Reid, but also the history of why he can only get so much of a percentage raise. And it has to do with his extension. Well, I'll put a link in the description, but this article from Yahoo Sports, basically you walk away after reading that article as if anybody like Naz Reid or, for example, Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu, any player that has drastically outperformed his previous salary. And this one talks about DeJounte Murray. He's the only one that has signed an extension under this new rule of the 140%. And so basically, to make a long story short, I feel like Naz Reid is really bitter at this rule. Also, guys like Naz Reid are really bitter at this rule, and they're for sure going to opt out just because, in spite of this rule. It's like this. If I'm Naz Reid, I go, I have a player option for 15 million. I can get an extension tacked onto that, but at the end of the day, I'm really only going to get 140% of that. So I'm just opt out and be a free agent and get what I'm worth now and get the respect. I want to see how much I'm worth now because I'm pretty sure it's like way over 20 million, possibly even 25 million. And that's just an example of a situation where Naz Reid is 99.9% gonna opt out of this $15 million option that he has. So going back to the other screen that I had on our YouTube channel, I just don't think it's gonna work. And yeah, I did a whole podcast on this about Naz Reid to the Warriors, but then after we posted it and we had already talked about it on the live stream, I was just like, okay, there's just no way Naz Reid is gonna opt in. Now, if he opts out, then he becomes a free agent, and it's very hard for us to get a free agent. We also talked about how Jonathan Kuminga, we should just keep him And so this video today, where Jaren Jackson Jr. is our 1A target, well, we're talking about trading JK. Now with Lauri Markkanen, we went through that whole detail. In fact, here is the spreadsheet that I used. And again, it caused the Warriors to gut the whole team because of the base year compensation rule, where if you send out Kuminga in a sign and trade, the value of that trade, his contract, you can only count it for 50% of that contract. So that just made it very hard to reach Lauri Markkanen's salary of 46.3 million. And again, the Naz Reid one did not work in terms of being able to acquire Naz Reid and the complications involved of what is his actual market value, and Minnesota being pretty much in the second apron or around it. And if you're sending out JK, the receiving team of the sign and trade has to be capped at the first apron. And so strike out Lauri Markkanen from the list of 1A targets, strike out Naz Reid from that as well. And here we were, Dean and I were just thinking, well, maybe it's just better to keep JK and then we can trade him in February when his full salary can be used in a trade. And we even went to bkref.com to look at some players who had salaries around 25, 27 million. And we came up with a list. But then Yossi Gozlan and Sam Quinn came up with this idea of trading for Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, I should say that this proposed trade, the full details of it are as follows. Again, this is Yossi Gozlan and Sam Quinn's mock trade, and it has the Warriors acquiring Jaren Jackson Jr. for JK, again, going out with the base year compensation rule, 50% of his salary, which they pegged at 30 million. And also a very clever trick, which is to take Gary Payton, our own free agent who has bird rights, signing him to a value that equates to Jaren Jackson Jr. And it just so happens Vince Williams Jr. and also a couple of second round picks so that the Warriors can reroute those picks to what turns out to be the Chicago Bulls. Now, I'm going to disagree with a couple things that Yossi and Sam came up with. The first part of their trade, it makes sense to me. Go after Jaren Jackson Jr. The little asterisk to that, though, is that they've got Gary Payton Jr. signed in a sign-in trade, signed at about 10 million plus to make the numbers work to equal Jaren Jackson Jr. and Vince Williams Jr. back. My thing is that I don't think the Grizzlies would want Gary Payton Jr. Now, the whole key to this really is to go all in, to empty the cupboard, as Steph Curry said before the Jimmy trade. Remember when Steph said, I don't want to be flinging assets left and right and emptying the cupboard? Well, this is JJJ, and if he's on the level of a Lauri Markkanen or Naz Reid that could really take us to the next tier, again, with Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond as the core, then you go all in for that. You have to. Steph's contract, Jimmy Butler's contract, Draymond's contract all end in the summer of 2027. So those are guys that you would really want to try your hardest to go get. So that's the first point of contention, where I just don't know that the Grizzlies would want Gary Payton when they see Moody still on our roster. So what I've done, and we'll get to the second part of their proposed trade, which I totally disagreed with, although I do love the fact that they picked Jaren Jackson Jr. as a Warriors target. And I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't think of that. We thought of Lauri Markkanen last year. We thought of Naz Reid. And I mean, I've toyed around with the idea of Zion Williamson. You know, you really got to find a tall power forward who is versatile. And I think Zion Williamson, fully healthy, checks off those boxes. but not all of the boxes. And of course, we can never really know for sure if he's 100% healthy, especially with the history of hamstring injuries. So let's take a look at my tweak to this. So here is, again, Yossi Gozlan's analysis. It ends up with Memphis being way below the first apron. They're going to be hard capped at the first apron for receiving a sign and trade player. And for the Warriors, you end up with Vince Williams. You sign Pat Spencer to a $2 million deal. You got the 41st draft pick. So you add it all up, you're above the first apron, but below the second apron at 200.8 million. And then Yossi and Sam, they suggest moving Moses Moody and Kevon Looney in a similar sign and trade, clever maneuvering in return for Lonzo Ball and Jalen Smith. Again, I'll get to that shortly. So let's tweak the first part of this trade because, as you can see here on my spreadsheet, I just don't know that the Grizzlies would want to trade Jaren Jackson Jr. unless they get a lot back. Like, it should hurt us, right? It should be kind of like we're really emptying the cupboard, like we're really stretching far for this, just as Orlando did with Desmond Bane. So they want to see you going the extra mile here. And so my idea of the extra mile is, well, why don't we just send Moody? You're taking our top young player in terms of salary, which is going to be JK at, let's say it's 30 million, just to keep it in sync with Gozlan and Quinn's idea, but then tack on Moody, who is the next highest salary on the pecking order of the Warriors. Like, I would have said Buddy Hield, but Memphis is going to find more value with Moses Moody at 11.6 million than they will Buddy Hield at 9.2 million. Now, it could be argued that Buddy having a non-guaranteed portion of his contract coming up and it being slightly cheaper, okay, maybe the Grizzlies want Buddy, but I'm assuming the worst case scenario here. And then to add on top of that, I went ahead and threw in Trace Jackson Davis, not just because of the low salary, but because we're getting Jaren Jackson Jr. And so that is a power forward that Memphis is giving up. Well, let's give them Trace Jackson Davis as their power forward. Now, I've added GG Jackson because the negotiation with Memphis is like, okay, well, if we're giving you Moody, then we're going to need some kind of point of attack defender back. GG Jackson, now look, he doesn't shoot as well as Moses. Moses is at about 37, 38% on threes. GG Jackson, several percentage points below that, 34-ish percent on threes. But he's a great point of attack defender. We know this because we played Memphis multiple times, especially 2 years ago. GG Jackson, one game, he completely shut down Steph Curry. And Vince Williams also did a good job. It was sort of a tag team between Vince and GG when they defended Steph a couple years ago, and they did a really good job, if you recall. And so I've got total incoming salaries 27.9, total outgoing with Trace 28.8. So we, with JK, signed at 30 million and then traded. We're going to be above the first apron, but luckily just below the second apron. So we can send out more than we're getting back. And so we're sending out 3 guys at 28.8. We're getting back 3 guys at 27.9. As far as I know, that adheres to the CBA rules. Now, I'm going to do whatever I can to ask around and make sure that I didn't forget any other little nitpicky CBA details. So, as far as I know, this works, but I'm here to learn, not to, put my foot down and say that this is the way and be a Sith Lord with absolutes like that. I'm here to learn. I want to be open to criticism here. And I just want to learn everything I can about the CBA and the salary cap rules as we go. And I've learned a lot since last year. For example, last year, I didn't know that Klay Thompson could do a sign and trade and kind of go to whatever team he wanted. We had thought the whole time that because he was a free agent, he would have to land with the Orlando Magic or the Brooklyn Nets, a team that had cap space. But then we learned that there's this thing called a sign and trade that you can kind of maneuver the right way to get to the destination that wants you. And so that's part of this equation. With Jaren Jackson Jr., you can go listen to Yossi and Sam Quinn talk about this. They totally justify Jaren Jackson Jr. wanting to come to the Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies, realizing that they might not get another opportunity to trade JJJ for this much in draft capital back. And that's one part that I haven't talked about yet is we would empty the cupboard for it. So you're sending out 3 first-round picks and a pick swap. That's pretty much emptying the cupboard, right?
Now, we don't know that Memphis is going to be willing to trade Jaren. Now, the reporting has been a little bit mixed where they've kind of signaled, no, we're planning to rebuild around Jaren and around Ja Morant. But I think teams have been a little skeptical about that. The other thing here is that Jaren has some degree of agency. And if he gets wind that he has a chance to go to the Warriors, now he can't renegotiate and extend there. But as a free agent in 2026, I think he might be able to just say, like, look, I'm planning to sign with the Lakers. You should trade me now, or I'd really like to go to the Warriors. Send me there. It would have to be a team like that, probably. But I don't think that they're like locked into keeping him. I think if they get another really significant offer, they would consider it. I know that market is not going to have much of an appetite for a quote unquote tank. But if you've gotten all of these Warriors picks and you got all those picks from Orlando in the Desmond Bane trade, and you still have Morant and Kuminga, you could kind of sell it as like a retool more than a rebuild, where it's like, we're going to see if these two have anything. Could they be like a 30-win team, 32-win team next year? And then we maybe put some of those picks back on the table and we try to trade our way back in, or we just draft, good young players. They have a really good draft track record. I think that would be something that they would consider if the Warriors were really prepared to go all in.
All right. So part of the justification of that is, ironically, Lauri Markkanen. Of course, you can listen to Sam Quinn in Yossi's podcast / YouTube video. But basically, we're using Markkanen as an example where once he signed the extension with Utah, he became actually less tradable at the higher value of his salary. So he renegotiated and got the extension. Now he's making 46 million a year. It's just harder to trade him. Not that Memphis is looking to just trade JJJ. Well, neither is Utah. We don't really know what Utah's up to, but there's the sense that they could keep Lauri or they could trade him. But at $46 million, they're kind of stuck keeping Lauri and working things out. Does Memphis want to be kind of like stuck in that situation, perhaps, where JJJ is just making too much money such that their options are limited and they're just locked into JJJ? With this idea, you're getting 4 more first rounders or 3 and a pick swap. And the idea is that the Grizzlies now get to really retool their entire roster and yet also have Jonathan Kuminga to see if he works with Ja Morant, which I personally think is quite exciting. And oh, by the way, in my mock, I've got Moody going there and TJD. Now, one thing we haven't talked about is Jaren Jackson Jr.'s fit with the Warriors, but I think we don't really need to talk a whole lot about that. Obviously, as a defensive player of the year, as a guy who's 6'11 with a lot of mass and muscle, like obviously on the defensive end, the Warriors would be pretty formidable, if not better than their top 5 ranking of last year. On the offensive end, well, look, again, I don't know how Dean and I missed this, but JJJ can shoot. And I'm thinking maybe it's because we always make fun of his shot release, but shoot, those things go in. And, he's been a stretch 4 this whole time. And maybe it's just the style that Memphis was playing, which, by the way, Sam Quinn addressed in their podcast, which is that if you'll recall, Memphis changed their entire offense last season which then, of course, resulted in Taylor Jenkins being fired. But they did keep the guys that came up with this. And I'm not sure if the assistant coach that came up with this is now their head coach or also got fired. I didn't do the research on that. But bottom line is JJJ has spent the last year in a quasi read and react system anyways. All right. So I hope I've convinced you that targeting Jaren Jackson Jr. is a great idea, actually. So we're going to empty the cupboard, and based on this tweak of Sam Quinn and Yossi Gozlan's idea, what I have is I have just this trade getting us about 4 million under the first apron. So when you do that, you can use the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is only about $6 million, but you can use that sort of as a slush fund. And what you can do is, now that we have our point of attack defender in GG Jackson, we have also another one in Vince Williams and a backup point guard. Now, Vince is listed as shooting guard, but if you go look at his stats from 2 years ago when Ja Morant was hurt, he started like 30 some odd games, maybe more, but he started a whole bunch of games, including the couple games against Golden State, and averaged 3.4 assists per game that year. So I think he can play point. Now, we're also envisioning retaining DeAnthony Melton, who can also play the 1 or the 2 and sometimes the 3. And get this, Looney. So use the taxpayer mid-level to pay Looney and Melton just a little bit more to make it attractive to come to Golden State again. So Melton has 8 years of experience. So the veterans minimum amount for that is automatically 3.3 million. So you give him a raise to like 5 million. That costs you only 1.7 million out of the $6 million taxpayer mid-level. And then you've got Looney with 11 years of experience. That's worth $3.6 million veterans minimum. Bump him up to 5 million as well. Both of these guys, 5 million bucks. It looks good. 5 million is a much better number than veterans minimum. And you'll just have barely enough to stay a little bit under the first apron here, including the 14th spot, which, I don't know, you just promote a two-way guy. Maybe it's Braxton Key. Maybe it's Taron Armstrong, depending on how they play in Summer League. That can be figured out. Maybe you buy a second-round pick. All right, so that's what I've got. And now let me kind of attack the Lonzo Ball, Jalen Smith idea. So I don't think Chicago would go for that. First of all, Lonzo Ball, $10 million salary, as you can see right here. So Sam Quinn's idea, along with the Yossi Gozlan, is send out Moody and sign and trade Looney for Lonzo Ball and Jalen Smith. Now, the Lonzo Ball idea, even though Sam Quinn really likes the idea of Lonzo fitting in with the Steve Kerr system, I don't know too much about Lonzo, but I do know he can play defense. So this kind of checks off the point of attack box, but we've not only checked that off with GG Jackson, but also DeAnthony Melton in my scenario. Now, Jalen Smith for Looney, like, that just doesn't make sense to me at all. We all know, as longtime Warriors fans, with all this behind the scenes knowledge, that we would definitely prefer Looney to Jalen Smith. Now, I know that Jalen Smith is more of a rim runner, but we've got Jaren Jackson Jr. now also as a rim runner. Heck, that's just something about the Steph Curry Warriors is since 2021, we really haven't had a rim runner. And that's just, you can't have it all, right? So that's the one thing in terms of multiple rim runners, we're only going to have one, Jaren Jackson Jr. All right, so that is what I've got for you guys. So let's just segue over to the discussion about keeping Jonathan Kuminga. All right, and this again was me and Dean in the last live stream. So with all that being said, do I want JK to stay or do I want Jaren Jackson Jr.? Now look, for me to say that it'd be fun to try and improve the team with Jaren Jackson Jr. And by now, I am convinced that he would take us to the next level. That is in no way throwing JK under the bus, right? I hope that me and Dean have shown you that we're cool with whatever. And so that's part of what we do here at Let's Go Warriors, is to remind you to still love your team and to root for whoever we put out on the floor. So that being said, even though this whole video and podcast is all about like trade scenarios and shipping Moses Moody out, Trace Jackson Davis, if they're watching this video, I hope they realize that at the end of the day, we're happy with whatever, because just that's how we are. We're not outraged by a whole lot of things, and we do our best to maintain the gratitude here. That's one of the things that I'm going to start to say over and over again. You know, as Steve Kerr has core values for the team, so do I for Let's Go Warriors. And those core values are gratitude, appreciation, mindfulness, which I'm stealing from Steve, empathy, which is actually a word that our Blue Ranchers and our audience members have really put to the forefront. And R is for respect. So even though we're saying, let's go trade for Jaren Jackson Jr., JK, you're out, Moody, you're out, Trace Jackson Davis, you're out. I mean, we still have a lot of respect for all these guys. So I hope you can understand that we're just here to say, let's go Warriors. And we're going to close out now with our Cholo file, which is our outro compiled by our Blue Rancher on YouTube, Cholo.
Today he came back. He came here today talking about how he got a new blicky.
For the uninformed, what's a blicky?
You don't know about no blicky, man. You had a blicky? You told me you had a blicky growing up.
Yeah.
You was a shooter.
A strap.
Yeah, that's a blicky.
More fire.
And Brate. Again, tonight we're going to go live with Game 7 and the Valkyries game. They're going to play the Connecticut Sun. So please join us for that. It's a really fun experience, and you can ask all the questions you want, even if you're... And that's all. I appreciate you checking us out. We're going to put this video not only on YouTube, we're going to put this JJJ trade scenario video not only on YouTube, but also Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So keep a lookout for that. And we'll see you for Game 7 tonight and the Valkyries. Appreciate you all. Let's go Warriors.